Welcome back to I Can't Believe It's Worship. I'm Lester Sim.
And I'm Lester Ong.
And once again, this is the Worship Podcast for amateurs, by amateurs.
Speak for yourself.
Yes, I am. I am really pretty amateur in this. But I think it's great, and I wish I had a resource like this where people would chat about it. And sometimes you don't want to chat with someone that's like so super experienced. And it can be enlightening to hear, how we journey through this. Okay, I'm speaking for myself, so how I'm gonna journey through and how my thoughts kind of evolve along the way. So yes,
just a quick detour for our listeners, by the way.
Yes,
I think Lester Sim's becoming less amateur of late.
Where's this going?
A couple of weeks ago, me and my worship pastor went to, by the way, a plug for the King's Worship Academy. If you're in Perth,
yep,
go and enroll in that. You'll get a good deal of teaching for an entire year at a super good price. But they didn't ask me to say that, by the way. But we were guest speaking at that event, at that teaching school, and then I brought Lester along, and he just got roped into one of the sessions with me, and he ended up answering questions, and now he's been invited back to speak at the Worship Academy, and I'm tagging along with him.
I'm not sure how that's gonna go. That's happening next week, so so
yeah, just a point to say that Lester's not as amateur as he looks like. He says things like, he's got a whole bunch of notes, and I don't have to refer to notes and that sort of thing, but he actually knows a lot. No. I'm just lazy.
Or maybe you're just way more confident than I am. Hey, but yeah, I'm able to have these kind of opportunities only because of the shoulders upon which I stand, on great men like you who have confidence in me to go like, hey, come along. So
he's saying I'm old and then I'm fat, which is why you can balance on my fat shoulders.
How you take all these things that I say, they're meant to be good. You twist it into he twisted into self-depreciating comments, which is not what I mean most of the time. Anyways, we want to begin this because this is a part 2 of something we did before, where we talked about worship and holiness, and it's a big one. Can we put this in 2 parts? Maybe not. I think it's going to be an ongoing kind of conversation. But there was one thing we talked about, and we'd like to briefly expand on it before we lead into our questions here. So in our last episode, we talked about what should our approach be. How do we approach this holy God? And we didn't toss this out in a previous episode. So we'd like to talk about it here and now. So in 1 Peter, and of course, this is within the context of when you are, let me see if I remember. As you go about doing your work for Christ, as you go about laboring for Christ. This is in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 17 to 19. It says, since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially, live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish. So there, as I read this, I know it's within the context of, okay, as we go about doing our work, have this perspective that we are foreigners here. But I look at this thing here, that we are living through this in reverent fear. And why reverent fear? It's because of what it says later on, where it says that you are not bought with mere silver and gold, but you have been bought, you've been purchased, you've been redeemed with the precious blood of Christ. And so that should weigh heavy upon you, right? To go that to go, that's not something I should take lightly, right?
Wait, last episode you said that we shouldn't have so much burden on us when we're leading worship.
Oh no, don't worry. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there.
I was starting to feel the guilt again.
Please no. Okay, no. Let the guilt sink in first, and it'll get better later. Yeah, sink in. Yeah. So here we go. Here's the picture I actually get. No, and I didn't say this at the worship arvo that we had, but I get this picture of, I'm not sure if this was a real show or something like that, where I think it was, I'm not sure, Denzel Washington, where he's, or Jason Statham, either one of them, where he's trying to save this girl who has been kidnapped by the mafia or something like that.
That's Liam Neeson.
Is it Liam Neeson? It might be. I don't know. I imagine this
love
scene.
Taken.
I will find you and I will kill you. Good luck. The first one was good. After a while, it just kind of got too repetitive. But wait. I want to paint a scene here. Okay, so hang on. So you got yes. I think it's from one of the movies. I don't know which one. If you know which one it is, you let me know, please. I think it's one of them, either Denzel or Jason Statham or Liam Neeson. Who knows? Now you confuse me. You threw in one more name and it could be him. But he's in the back of the car and he's injured. And the mafia kind of goes like, okay, fine. We'll release the girl, but only if you surrender yourself to us. And so he kind of goes, okay, fine. And so he gives himself into the thugs, and the girl goes scot-free. And so as she's running away, she's not like, woo, I'm free now, but she understands that there is some guy that is gonna die, like being handed over. So in that sense, I think I fully get what First Peter is saying here about you got to have this reverent fear, and I think about this verse. I think it's in Mark where it says that his life was a ransom for many. His life was a ransom for many. So there's that reverential fear that has to be there. It's not something that's like, well, great, now I can do whatever I want. But on that flip side, ready? So while that guilt and shame is just kind of weighing upon Lester's shoulders now, that I stand on. Am I the guilt that's weighing?
I think we have a revelation tonight.
Oh man. Okay. I'm gonna step off your shoulders in a moment. So there's something else that definitely stands out here in First Peter, where we have definitely been redeemed. And so there's definitely freedom.
Yes.
And so I think that it would also be inappropriate for you to be moping around, and just be like, oh my goodness, now my life is horribly changed. Someone died for me, but hey, you're free, right? There is that freedom that comes with it. And so I think about it this way, that we have to approach God with reverential confidence. There is a confidence in approaching him, that you know that you're not going to be cast out, but at the same time you're approaching him knowing that firstly he's the king of the universe, he's the God of the universe, he's got infinitely perfect standards, but also because there was a price that was paid for you to even be in that place of confidence. So I think that when we balance these two things out, I know it sounds like they're contradictory. I don't think they are. I think they can coexist well. And if you actually manage to find that balance, perfect. Yeah.
Actually, I will go to this passage which I got Lester to read a few moments ago, because it's actually even more sensible now in terms of what you're saying. It's in Hebrews chapter 12, and that talks about our approach to worship. It says, you have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to trumpet blast, or to a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them. So this scary, gloomy place, like it says that you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands and thousands upon angels in joyful assembly, to a church of the firstborn whose names are written in the book of life. So it's all really exciting, sounds free and wonderful and joyful.
Yeah.
But then in verse 28, which we didn't get to earlier when we read it together, it says, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire."
Wow.
So you get this contrast of freedom and joy, and yet reverence and awe at the same time, because the conclusion is God is a consuming fire.
Wow, so good. Thanks for putting that out for us to think about. So I think what we are getting and what we're understanding is this, that it's not one or the other. You got to have both. This freedom that you have, and having this reverence, right? And yes, this is a worship podcast. So to relate it to our worship on stage, or say in your cell groups and whatever, how does that impact you? What's your application here? I think that sometimes you got people who fully understand that freedom aspect, right? And say they're jumping around and great, like you know, they're absolutely free. There's some people who are absolutely so serious in their worship, and this almost makes you wonder, like, really, have you been set free? It feels like you've been weighed down even more. So I think there has to be a perfect balance in the way we understand this, and I trust that it will come out in our song. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was to kind of continue on from the previous episode. We want to talk about some passages that we see in the Old Testament. There's some difficult passages when we talk about the holiness of God, and we alluded to some of the incidents here. In particular, we have one with Uzzah, who reached out and he touched the ark because the oxen stumbled. And he was basically great heart, right? Great guy, kind of going like, oh, it's gonna fall, right? And he stretches his hand out, boom, struck dead.
I always found that really unfair.
Yeah, I thought it was a little unfair too. Like, Uzzah could have been like, just this perfect, like, great guy, right? And he, of all things, definitely he's not one of those bystanders that say, "Oh, look, the ark's falling, let me whip up my phone and take a video of this." No, he's like, I want to do something about it.
They didn't have phones back then.
Really?
Maybe he would have whipped out his scroll and slowly described it.
Maybe. Sorry, Uzzah.
But too late for him anyway.
Yeah, but so I fully agree. I think it was unfair. Uzzah dies, and I think you actually see King David. He's pretty, like, upset.
What's he upset at, though?
Oh. Okay. Actually, this one I didn't study it as much. I just remember him being upset. So, do you remember this one?
No, I do remember the story, but I have never resolved what he was upset with.
I've always thought, and I could be wrong, maybe there's a high chance that I'm wrong, because like I said, I didn't study into this. But I think there's a good chance that David was upset because, like, bam, like what a consequence for someone who was trying to help. I thought so. I may be wrong. There's a good chance I may be.
So he's angry that the process didn't happen well. He's angry at the apparent injustice of someone who gets struck down because he was trying to be helpful.
Yeah,
or maybe he's angry at God for not doing what he expected.
Yeah, maybe.
Or all of the above.
Who knows? Okay, we should probably read this and then we'll talk about it some other time. Yeah. And then we also have this other case of the sons of Aaron, right? Correct? Yeah, the sons of Aaron, where it records how they offered unauthorized fire to the Lord. And as a result, same thing, boom, struck dead. And it's so interesting. In this case here, what's Aaron's response? He's quiet. It's almost like he's like, yep, fine, I accept it. Like, I understand. Yeah. So there's that, and there's also Ananias and Sapphira, where this is in the New Testament, what was it? They sold land and they took the money. They kept some for themselves. They brought it to the apostles and went, well, here's all the money. And they said, well, is it really all the money? Sapphira, I think, no, it was Ananias first, right? That said, yes, that's all the money. Boom, struck it. Sapphira comes in and they're like, okay, you know what? Woman, we'll give you a chance, right? Is this all the money? Yes, it is. Boom, struck it too. And so we do see this very like, whoa, like what in the world's going on here? It's
too much striking dead, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot of bodies like being piled up here, and we get this sense. To me, I think that the holiness of God is uncompromising.
It's like Liam Neeson taking out the mafia.
All of you, every single one.
There's a litter of dead bodies.
Yeah, how can we? Can't believe we are comparing a holy God to Liam Neeson. Now, whenever you read the Bible, you imagine Liam Neeson's voice. All right. Wait, hang on. Where were we? Yeah. So we get this idea of this uncompromising character of God's holiness. He doesn't look at your intention. In the case of Uzzah, right? He doesn't go, well, okay, you were trying to be helpful, and I'll give you a pass. It's a hard line. It's like I am distinct, and it doesn't. God doesn't really look at like what you're trying to do. He doesn't look at your lineage. He doesn't look at who your parents are and whatnot. He just goes, well, if you got sin and you enter into the holy place, or if you want to make contact with me, he doesn't get defiled or he doesn't get unholy, but you suffer the consequence. Yeah. So I think we get this picture, right? But I do understand, and I think part of the reason why we are talking about this is because this is the very same God that we approach.
Yes. And
if anything, I think we are possibly as sinful, more sinful than these people.
Yeah. So what I like about, and I'm thinking just if I isolate it to Uzzah's story, because Uzzah is the most complex in the sense that he was well-intentioned, but God's holiness is still inviolable and absolute. And so you're quite right, the intention doesn't matter. It is just, are you doing the thing that's distinct and what God required? And clearly he didn't. No matter how well-intentioned he was. And I think when you get to 2 chapters later, David had to research how to handle the ark again. And I don't know how he forgot it, but probably didn't do enough quiet time.
Shots fired.
And later on he discovered that the way to carry the ark was not with an oxen's cart, but with poles inserted through the rings. It would have been obvious, right? The rings were there for a reason. And then carried on the shoulders of the Levites. And there's no, in essence, there's no rhyme or reason. It's not about how do we get from A to B. It's just about, did we do it the way God wanted it to be done? And I think that points to his character and his holiness, and that's it. There's no question about that. It's just very straightforward. And so outside of the cross, that is the consequence. Right.
I actually had this weird thought: what would have happened if Uzzah didn't stabilize the ark and it just fell? Well, I couldn't imagine like what would happen. Like,
but I don't think that there's anything magical in that sense about the ark either. It's not like God's presence would sort of spill out like in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the ark and all these things fly out. Presumably, in that sense, it was just a very beautiful box.
But it would have been like kind of defiled by like hitting mud and stuff, right? Like, I don't know, that's what I think would that matter? Not that we have any answers, but
No.
Yeah.
And God might just choose. In fact, there's even the question that was God hovering above the ark as it was traveling. I'm not sure if that was the case.
Yeah. I know some of you might have this question here of, okay, fine, we talked about the sons of Aaron, we talked about Uzzah, and all this happened, and like what you said, without the cross, that's what happens. But here we have Ananias and Sapphira, the members of the church. So some of you might be wondering, well, this is certainly different, right? It's post-Jesus. It's post Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection. So how do you explain this? I actually did a little bit of digging into this. I'm not sure if this is the most accurate one. But my understanding is this, that the punishment on Ananias and Sapphira, which seem very Old Testament like, you could almost understand it to be a setting of a standard for the early church. And we understand that the early church in the book of Acts was in its formative years, and there were a lot of things that needed to be set right. And with this aspect of giving, this aspect of integrity, my understanding is that God wanted to in that sense make an example for the early church to learn a lesson, I guess. Yeah. Any particular thoughts on that?
That's a lesson not easily forgotten.
Yeah, man. Yeah, especially not for Ananias and Sapphira. Yeah. So overall, I think we get this, that God's holiness is, I like the word that you use, absolute. And the word I use, uncompromising. So we have to understand that that's God's holiness. Pre-cross, that's what would happen, but we are post-cross, Jesus' death on the cross, resurrection. And that's the reason why, in a very good way, we don't get struck dead.
And actually, what's really interesting, I'm also thinking about this as you're talking, when you see the progress of the ark, so to speak, from the Old Testament to Jesus being the embodiment of the ark in the New Testament, and how, when an unclean, unholy person touches the ark, it's almost like they get struck. Well, they do get struck dead.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the maybe I'm crossing wires here, but in Leviticus, for example, there's a lot that talks about unclean people making unclean other people unclean, right?
Right.
Or unclean things making people unclean. Whereas when we get to the New Testament, Jesus, as the walking ark, actually, I'll say, violates the unholiness of people and actually makes them clean in the process, which I think is a really interesting twist.
Wow. Wait. I had this crazy thought. Because I've always thought about this, and I did think about this in a very loose way, that there are certain qualities of the Lord that are contagious. And part of that is just this very simple aspect of being clean. Like the leper that came up to Jesus, and you would expect, like, okay, leper, and all the Jews, all the disciples would have gone, okay, stay away, right? Because if you touch us, then we are now unclean. But Jesus walks over, reaches out, and touches him, and in that moment, in that instant, this leper is made clean. And so you see this transference of clean over to unclean, making that unclean thing clean, and it's very counterintuitive. Would you therefore say that the holiness of God is contagious?
I like that idea.
Right, when a holy God encounters you and touches you, you are made holy just very simply by the fact that you have been redeemed now by the cross.
And it makes our approach to God in worship even more critical. If we took an Old Testament approach, we couldn't approach God unless we were clean, unless we were holy before we came.
Yeah.
Whereas now we approach God in whatever state we're in. And as a result of the encounter, we become more holy, we become clean.
Wow.
And it's like that picture. In fact, one of my favorite stories of worship actually is in Luke 7, where the sinful woman in Simon's house, she is labeled like that. So quite rude, but that's how the gospel writer says it. And everyone knew she was a sinful woman. She walks in with the alabaster box, breaks it at the foot of Jesus. So a picture of worship, a picture of an unclean person approaching a holy God. And Jesus doesn't strike her down at all, even though the people around her were criticizing her. And on the contrary, he tells her that her sins are forgiven. And so that picture then is, I think, how we should approach worship in the New Testament. Right? We come as we are, as we enter God's presence, we come out transformed.
Wow. I like that. I like that. Wow, cool. Very interesting concepts that we weren't planning on talking about, but as we chatted, it just came up. Oh, fun. All right, so we're going to talk about something a little testy here. What spiritual qualifications should we set for modern day worship teams?
Did you say testy?
Is that not the right word?
No, I missed your word.
Yeah, testy. I said testy. I think Lester has more experience here because he has been in this this line of being in charge of the worship team. So you would have overseen a lot of people coming in, being a part of the team. And over the years, I'm pretty sure your mindset has kind of evolved, shifted. Where was it before? Where are you at now?
I've actually grappled with this for quite a bit. I'm actually quite easygoing these days, in the sense that I feel that the older I get, the less perfect I believe I am. and the more flawed, makes sense. The more flawed and sinful I believe I am. And so I get very concerned if a person's holiness, for want of a better word, is the standard by which we admit them onto the worship ministry. Now, that's not an unqualified statement, of course, because it's a platform ministry, and so people are standing there and they're in open sin, for example, and flaunting it. How will people respect you to follow you as a leader in worship? So that's probably somewhere where I would draw a line. I would actually prefer to look at it as a consequence of maturity. And if you have some semblance of spiritual maturity, then I think that's a good qualification for someone in the worship ministry. And then even if you're not particularly spiritually mature, but you are on the trajectory and you're learning and you're striving in that way, then I think that's fine for me as well. And the worship ministry has quite a large, I would say, a large spectrum of influence depending on what role you play in the team. And obviously, a worship leader who's the front person of the worship team on a Sunday needs to be spiritually mature, more above reproach than other people. But I think I'd make more allowances for most other people on the team.
I did think about that one thing when you said if a person's in open sin and flaunting it. Recently, we have been going through a Bible study in my department where we're talking through 1 Corinthians chapter 5, chapter 6. And it's that bit where it talks about when there are unbelievers who are in sin. And I think it describes these believers who are in sin, who are being unrepentant. It says, have nothing to do with them. Do not associate with them. Don't even eat with them. And so it's not to say that, hey, whoever's a sinner in church, you cut yourselves off from them, because then we wouldn't have any fellowship in church. All of us are still sinful, right? But I think it's that aspect, like what you said, perfectly put, in this open sin, and they are unashamed, and they're going like, well, look at me, that's okay, I'm living this life perfectly okay, redeemed by Christ, so I can do whatever I want, kind of thing. If they have this unrepentant mindset, then I think we definitely shouldn't have them on the worship team. But even more so, you see in 1 Corinthians where Paul's even harsher to say, don't associate with them. And it's almost as harsh to say, if I could interpret what he's trying to say in our current context, it's almost like you might want to cut the person out from your community of believers, because it's almost like you want other people to also know, how we talked about that God wants his people to be distinct.
Yes.
Yeah. And so having this person in the mix would be therefore like, oh, so your God's like that, and you get this picture of Jehovah, of Yahweh, which is inaccurate. So I'd say definitely someone like that shouldn't be on the team. I fully agree with what you say about the spiritual maturity, because I was wondering about this thing in 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 6, where it says that he must not be a recent convert. I think this is in the context of selecting a leader or pastor within the church. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. And so it paints this picture of this person mustn't be a new believer. Of course, you might argue, well, this is with regard to selecting a pastor, but we do know, and like what you said, it's a platform ministry. People are going to see you. You are still leading people, right? Whether or not you are a singer on stage or you're a guitarist, there's an aspect of people are looking at you and they're following. And so I agree, this person must not be spiritually immature. There must be some, understanding of the word. Spiritual maturity must be in there. I think those are decent pointers that you have made.
Let me put a spanner in the works and ask you this question.
No. Yes, but go ahead. Come on.
Would you let a non-Christian onto the worship team?
Wow. Cannot. I So if you ask me, right, definitely cannot. Like, so you know how we've been talking so much about you cannot have right worship or authentic worship without the right knowledge of God. And so if you don't believe, or if you're an unbeliever, you're not saved, right? I can safely argue that you don't have right knowledge of who God is. So you're up on stage not to worship. And I go so far as to say that even if you're a guitarist, right, or a drummer, I think that you're still leading people. And that's why I would encourage every single person on my team, whenever they are on duty, I say, hey, it's not just the singer's not just a worship leader. When you're playing your instrument, right, have a posture of worship as well. It hits different. Like, everyone's looking at you. It's so obvious, right, when you're staring at like all the singers and you're like, oh, okay, everyone has a posture of worship. Then you look over to guitarist or pianist or drummer, and they're kind of chilling out, like just waiting for the next beat. It's so obvious. So I think everyone's leading, and therefore by that argument, I think a non-Christian cannot be on the team.
I'm prepared to say otherwise, but before I do and tell you why, let me ask you another question, potentially leading. Would you have a non-Christian on your car park marshal team or your ushering team?
I would say no. I feel uncomfortable with it. And I think the baseline is that even say if you're on the welcome team or you're on a car park marshalling team, what you're doing there is not just fulfilling a function. You are welcoming people into the house of God. And that is more than just arranging cars. That's more than just saying, hey, sit here, there's an empty seat here. There's so much more to it. I kind of get what you're trying to get at, that that these things are also similarly public, right? That people see you and stuff like that. But I don't know. I actually feel like I'm more at peace saying no.
And what if you're a contractor caterer that is going to feed the church after service in the kitchen, and so you've been brought in as an unchurched catering business?
I feel like Lester's just gonna keep going on with it.
Well, I mean, I suppose I appreciate where your position is.
Yeah.
I've also, there's an element of me which I'm thinking that it's not a bad thing to let unchurched people participate as well, because and I'm talking more broadly, and I'll get to the worship team a bit later on, but in the sense that if people want to be part of it, they want community, they want to help, they want to volunteer, why shouldn't we allow them to do that? In a sense, yes, it might not be as engaging as someone.
Sorry, I just thought of the perfect answer. I'm not sure if it's going to be perfect. You continue first. Sorry.
On your view, it probably may not be as engaging in the way they usher people into the house of God, or they direct cars into the right parking spots. But that could be a hit that we're prepared to take to be an inviting community. Okay, now you tell me.
Okay. How good of a person are we if we are inviting people, unbelievers, to basically to worship God? And we have already said that, like, you are coming into God's presence, right? And we also said that the only reason why we can step in and not get killed is because we have been redeemed.
Yes.
We have been cleansed. We have been made holy. We have been sanctified by Christ. The definition of an unbeliever is someone who doesn't believe in Christ and hasn't been sanctified. And so therefore you're trying, it's almost like you're baiting them in, like, oh, come into the most holy of holies, and like they step in. And I do wonder, right? Like, of course, we don't see anyone being struck down. But that's actually what we're doing, aren't we?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily the case. Welcome to the slaughter. No. I guess it depends. The question is, the way you're putting it would be dependent on at what point does a person start to trust in the cross, I suppose.
Wow. I don't know about this, man. Like,
well, maybe
this is a tough one.
Maybe we don't have to resolve it today, because I've got a lot of thoughts that are more theological and broader in scope. But there have been examples in the past, and I knew of a large church in Kiev who actually didn't have a music team, and their story was they actually hired musicians, and I don't think there was anything that the musicians did that were particularly offensive and confronting to the people being led into the worship. And obviously the worship leader was a Christian. But the story went that after a few weeks, the worship team actually turned to the pastor and said, "You've been giving altar calls every week. When are you going to ask us a question?"
Wow.
And so the entire worship team of unchurched people became saved. But the fact that they actually were in that environment suggests perhaps that they were on the way somewhere.
Yeah.
Even Henry Seeley tells the story of how he used to sit at the back of the class when Russell Evans was preaching at the school, and he got involved because Russell Evans asked him to play the keyboard, and that was the beginning of his journey into becoming a Christian. Lincoln Brewster, who's less well known these days, I suppose, but
hey, I know him.
Same story of how he was basically just roped in, and that was the start of his faith journey. So I don't know. For me, the jury is a bit out. I know I've said what I've said earlier, but these stories, and I don't want to necessarily teach out of experience, but these stories kind of suggest to me that sometimes God can use things that are a bit less predictable.
Or maybe the way to think about it is that even though it wasn't done right, but God's mercy and grace still made it work out for good. Right?
Like Uzzah.
But that doesn't give us a license, right? To kind of go, okay, just because it worked before, surely it must be God's plan. So, hey, let's go into highways, byways, and go, come on in, play on our worship team, Yeah, I see what you're talking about. I really do. And it does make it a tough one when you look at all these kind of testimonies, right? And you can't just disregard it and go like, well, you got saved through the wrong way or the wrong channels or whatever. No, but I think it's just part of how God's, just how he makes all things work out for good. And that's part of who he is. And I think that's a big part of why our God's so different. And so even though in something broken like this, which I think, contrary to Lester, which I think is not the most right, then, but even then, God still works through it. It's almost like how, like you said, the right way for the Ark of the Covenant to be carried was by Levites. And even though, yes, oxen can do the job, like I know it sounds very, very, very harsh to liken. I'm not really drawing this direct comparison to say that, oh, if you're an unbeliever, you're an oxen. No, but there's this aspect of the right way of doing it, wrong way of doing it. But even though the wrong way was done, there was still some grace in that, if I could say.
It did get some distance before.
It did get some distance.
Occurred.
And could it still continue to work out? Yeah, but there was a better way. To be continued with this particular question. As I said, testy.
It is testy. But I like your answer. I might adopt that. But and I'm not about to change our worship ministry policy anytime soon. It is a bit too controversial.
Our last and final question here. Are we too casual in worship today?
Evidently, I have been.
I think when we thought about this question, I think, of course, from our experience, we are looking at we can only look at our own team. And they're great people, but at times you do think about the posture of which worship is being approached. And you might not always get the same sense of, like there's this reverence here, but you almost get the feel like, oh yeah, people are having fun, and it's okay to have fun. But it seems like that's all there is to it. So that's what we had in mind, or that at least that's what I had in mind when I thought of this question.
So is it okay to have fun?
No, definitely.
Okay, good.
When we're doing fast songs,
yes,
I love doing like my helicopter spins and stuff. I love having fun with the people because that's part of that freedom that we have, right? But I think when we're too casual, it's because we forget, like what First Peter says, we forget that we have been bought by the precious blood of Christ. So I don't know. I think there's something that we have to do to balance it out. We definitely err more on the side of being too casual, I feel, at this moment. What do you think?
I think there's a risk, but I'm pretty permissive. So,
right.
In fact, just the other week, I found myself laughing out loud, pretty loud backstage. I don't remember what I was laughing about, but then someone said to me, shh. Because literally there was one fire door between backstage and the pulpit
right.
where the auditorium was. So.
Right. No. I think even then, so it's not that we're trying to say laughing's wrong. No, it's not wrong, but I think it's just the general heart's posture. Maybe something else that can describe this is, because for us we do 2 services. So for the second service, we don't force our team to sit through the sermon a second time, because most of them are paying attention the first time, which is really good. And so the second time we are backstage in a green room, and we are ready to rock up before for the response song. And at times I do see that we're still goofing off before the response song. And so to me, I'm like, oh, hold up, like people are about to respond to the word that they're hearing right now. How can we be like this? How can our heart's posture be like this? Surely we have to be
game face.
Yeah, no, exactly, like what you're talking about, right? So we have this perspective of okay, no, don't worry, when the doors open, when we head out there, we got our game face on. But that's not the posture of worship, right? You can't just you can't be laughing at someone goofing off like backstage, and then 2 seconds later walk around like, yes Lord, like come and move in this place. Nah, I possibly label you as having 2 personalities or really being a hypocrite. So I don't know. I feel like I'm definitely more conservative on this. And I think that there has to be the general posture of being in the zone, if that makes sense. Being in that zone of, okay, like Lord, what do you want to do? Kind of thing. Yeah.
Man, I'm feeling the heavy burden of guilt again. Let's just climb on my shoulder.
I'm climbing on your shoulders again. I'm jumping on your shoulders.
And I'm feeling like, man, I'm the chief goofer offer.
Really? I actually feel like you set quite a good tone when you during rehearsals. Like you do goof off, but during rehearsals, like you set the tone. Like, you know how when we do rehearsals, and most of the time the worship leader is just singing the lyrics, looking at the lyrics on the screen. I noticed something about you which is pretty different to all the other worship leaders. You have your eyes closed, you're really worshiping, hands raised, you're ready to jump into spontaneous worship anytime. And to me, I'm like, wow, so good. You're setting this posture of worship even during the rehearsal, and I appreciate that. And so I've actually added that I've adopted that myself, but of course with a balance of ensuring the technicalities are right during the rehearsal.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I do that is because I suck at the technicality.
You see, this is the same
distract them. But actually, the principle is this, and now that you brought it out, I'll make it a teaching moment. The principle is this, and you do it to an extent too, because yes, the potential for goofing off and treating the moment less reverentially than you could is actually always there. And so now talking to leaders, what do we do with that? We could leave the vacuum, or you can fill the vacuum with something more reverential. And so what you're saying to me is rehearsals potentially could be a vacuum space where you can goof off, as long as you play the music, you've done your job. But I'm choosing to fill the vacuum by saying, let's be worshipful in the midst of the technicality.
Right.
And one thing that you and one of our other worship leaders, Karis, does, and I'm doing it too now, is in between services, and we're sitting in the green room resting before the ministry time in the second service, you guys talk about the sermon. So you are deliberately filling the vacuum by saying, hey, let's keep in this attitude, let's have a moment of discussion. How do you apply the sermon? And you ask those questions, and so it keeps people in the zone, so to speak.
Wow. How do you put it all so beautifully, like, together? Wow. Yeah, I like that idea of filling the vacuum, and I guess as worship leaders we have to be mindful then. Is this a space for, and like what you said, there's always this tendency, right, to start like getting distracted. And how do we fill that with something meaningful, purposeful, where we are fixing our minds and our spirits still centered on Christ.
Yeah, and I think that's a leadership responsibility, actually. That in anything, we need to make sure we fill it with the right sense of purpose.
Huh. Well put, sir. Well put.
Thank you.
Oh, I actually realized that through these podcasts, like, if you as a listener, you think you're gleaning so much, I'm the first person that's like gleaning off stuff, like, because as we're talking about this, not everything that we're doing here is scripted, but as we talk about it, I kind of go like, oh yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. So yeah, you're actually hearing me grow along the way, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm also starting to change my mind on who I let on the
Good. Yeah. Hey, but it has been so good talking about this. I've enjoyed myself. I hope that you've enjoyed yourself too, Lester.
I have.
Yeah. And
I'm also seeing parallels with the gospel and Taken.
oh no!
because Liam Neeson has to be given up, right? And so he has to go into the den of hell,
right,
so that he can beat up on all the bad guys and erupt out of that place victorious.
Hey,
yeah.
Actually, there's a Tim Keller thing on this. Not about Taken. We'll talk about it some other time. Maybe on the next episode. We have to put it down. We have to talk about it. Taken and the gospel and Tim Keller. How they all three come in together perfectly. No, actually, yeah, I'm serious. There's something that Tim Keller talks about. I'm like, wow, this is a pretty good perspective.
All right, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. But otherwise, we hope you've enjoyed listening to us. And with whatever stuff, any questions that you have, anything that you resonated with, we encourage you, plonk it on the comment section, right? Even if you know our phone numbers, still plonk it on there, just so we have this illusion that we got followers. Thank you. Otherwise, we have appreciated you, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you then.
See ya.